Hey there, hunters. Kai's Whitefang, Pack Leader Scourge Alliance here, and today I am on the PTS, and I want to show you guys the changes with the Werewolf DPS. I wanted to keep things as similar as I had them on live, so I'm using my same CP setup that I have on live, and I'm using the same gear that I am using on live. So here we have Kina, 2 pieces. They actually buffed this, so it's 560 damage. We're using Reliquin's Perfected Jack, and we're using Blood Moons with Bloodthirsty and weapon damage on all the jewelry. We have a precise 2-hander that we're using with the 7% increased critical, and we're using the shadow. So first one, we're just going to go through the regular DPS rotation that I'm doing on live, and the follow-up one I'm going to be using Brutal Pounce towards the execute phase. The math on the Brutal Pounce really isn't too promising. The only way I would suggest really using this is when there's multiple enemies to apply it to. The math on Brutal Pounce is pretty bad. Here I'll show you. So if you have your Brutal Pounce, Howl of Despair, and Claws of Life, it takes 2 activations of Brutal Pounce. First is your Pounce, and then your secondary is your Carnage. They are more expensive than your Howls and your Claws, so it takes more resources to do. And damage-wise, you're really not going to see benefit using the Brutal Pounce into the Carnage until your target is in the 25% health or lower range. So we're going to save that for then. So just to give you guys a heads up, here is the damage that is done with Brutal Pounce, Howl of Despair, Claws of Life. Since it takes 2 to activate Brutal Pounce, I've added in the leap damage into the Carnage activation and added those together. So you'll see how much damage you get from 2 ability activations. So first one is Brutal Pounce into the Carnage. Second is Howl of Despair into another Howl of Despair, kind of your spammable. And then final is your Howl of Despair into Claws of Life. So at 100%, this is where it comes in. %, the damage you do to your target. 50%. And 25%. So you can see we're really not going to gain any advantage of using Brutal Pounce until the end of our rotation, so I'm going to save that for when we hit that 25% threshold to start using that. So let's give her a shot and see what she comes out to. Alright, so there you see, we're coming out pretty decent here. Same as on live. So one thing to note with this at the moment is you'll probably be wanting to use the Howl of Agony if you're doing solo events, because that Howl of Despair has that 10% that's working on it right now when the enemy is facing you. Currently, Howl of Agony is not doing anything with that. So the DPS we get off that, you may see an extra K or two off of that. So expect like an 83 to 83.5K DPS when that's said and done. Uh, your Brutal Carnage down here squeaked us out a little bit more DPS. And if we look at our graph, you can see because we're using that extra execution damage, our DPS is spiking up there towards the end of the fight as intended. So my input on the changes with the Brutal Pounce is we really don't get to use it that much. You see, I only use it a couple times. We got 5 on there. So we have 5 chances and 5 ticks of Brutal Carnage. We're really only using it the last 25% of damage phase. So it's still an ability that we're really not using until the very end. The nice thing with Brutal Carnage is it gives you a little bit of weapon damage, so when you're fighting multiple opponents, it's going to give you a nice little damage spike to the rest of your fight, so it's kind of worth using. Feral Pounce, on the other hand, currently is only giving you 1 second to use and is costing essentially 100 less stamina to activate, because that morph gives you back 100 stamina when you either activate the Carnage or when you use the Pounce. So you see that I left out of the rotation there. I'm not using Hircine's Rage. I will do that here on this next DPS parse, and you can see what that's kind of doing for the rotation, and in PvE what it's really doing for you. You're losing out a damage ability during that phase. It's a very short-term buff, so you have to essentially remove X many casts from abilities that will do damage for you. It's high risk, low reward in my opinion, instead of that high risk, high reward in PvE content. Now, if there's a certain thing that you need to burst down quick, is there a Shadow Orb or something like that you need to take out really fast, this might be good to use during that phase. Otherwise, just having that Major Brutality on there is good. So in this parse, we're doing weaving in the Hircine's Rage is whenever we can, in order to keep using this ability. You see I'm using Tripots. We don't need to use Brutality or Savagery pots anymore, so that's kind of cool that we can use Magicka pots to kind of fuel Hircine's Rage. But the chance in an actual fight in an actual dungeon of us being able to utilize Hircine's Rage is pretty small, because you're always going to be getting plinked by something or ticked by something that the chance of you getting the buff to get a small amount of DPS boost, it's not really worth it. So they need to rework that somewhere and make it easier for you to gain that buff. And the biggest thing is, you've got the Hircine's Rage going, but you got Major Berserk, but you're also taking more damage, so it's high risk, like I said, low reward. And I'll show you that here on this dummy. I'm going to be using it as much as possible. during this fight, and we'll see what it does. So you're asking yourself, okay, how did you get 80% major berserk uptime? Well, I basically cast a healing ability 35 times, so that's 35 abilities that could have done damage, instead of trying to bolster the damage of everything else that I was doing. So we have a really powerful spammable ability that we're missing out of. And if we have our other abilities here, our other dots that are getting added on, it'd be one thing if we had a whole bunch of dots that we were taking advantage of, laying down 4, 5, 6 dots on a target and then gaining major berserk. But we're not. We only have a couple here, and for the most part, the ones that we have are way down here in the DPS range. We're not in the 5, 6, 7, 8K range that other classes or specs have the ability to get to. So that major berserk really isn't that important to us, and the fact that it is a very short-term buff means that we have to cast it very frequently in order to keep it up as much as we can. So I hope that was insightful for you guys. Hopefully, when it goes live, you guys aren't trying to utilize this ability if it goes out live as is, in PvE content, because you just don't get any benefit from it. Only use it when you're trying to burst down a particular target. So hopefully that was informative. Until next time, happy hunting.